It was close to midnight when we first spotted it, barely visible off the desolate Arizona highway, a rest stop that none of us remembered seeing before. Miles of barren desert stretched around us, the horizon swallowed by the inky blackness of the desert night. I had been driving for hours, the steady hum of the engine and the rhythmic flashing of the headlights cutting through the desert like a lullaby, slowly numbing my senses. The rest stop appeared like a mirage, the faint glow of its flickering neon sign promising a brief reprieve from the seemingly endless stretch of road. "We could use a break," Alex said from the passenger seat, his voice groggy with fatigue. In the back, Jenna stirred awake, blinking at the dim lights of the rest stop as we pulled into the parking lot. Something about the place felt off. The building was small, old, with peeling paint and large glass windows that reflected nothing but darkness. Mannequins filled the windows, faceless, unsettling figures posed as if frozen mid-motion. They were dressed in old-fashioned clothes, the kind you'd see in vintage thrift stores or forgotten attics. "Man, this place is creepy," Jenna mumbled, but none of us argued. We were too tired. We just needed to stretch our legs, use the bathroom, and get back on the road. Besides, it was the only sign of life for miles. I parked, and we got out, the chill of the desert night cutting through our clothes. The wind howled around us, whistling through the empty parking lot, but no one else seemed to be around. No other cars. No sounds of life. Just us. The mannequins loomed behind the glass, their eyeless faces turned toward us as if they were watching. Inside, the place was just as eerie as it looked from outside. The harsh, buzzing fluorescent lights did nothing to ease the feeling that something was wrong here. A single man sat behind the counter, not much older than any of us, but with sunken eyes and skin so pale it seemed almost translucent under the flickering lights. He barely glanced up as we walked in, his expression blank. The rest stop itself was tiny, just a small convenience store area with dusty shelves of snacks and drinks. Off to the side, the door to the restroom creaked open as if beckoning us in. I turned to Jenna and Alex, both of them looking around warily. The mannequins lined the walls inside too, their stiff, frozen bodies posed in casual scenes, one reading a magazine, another holding a coffee cup as if they were patrons waiting for a ride. "How is this place even open?" Jenna muttered, her voice low. She was right. It was like walking into an old movie set. Everything felt staged, unreal. The air was stale, as if it hadn't been breathed in for years. "Let's just get in and out," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. Alex nodded, already heading for the restroom. Jenna and I wandered toward the shelves, pretending to browse, but neither of us reached for anything. That's when I noticed it. The mannequins had moved. I blinked, trying to make sense of what I was seeing. The one closest to the counter, the one with the coffee cup, its head had turned. I was sure of it. It was now angled slightly toward us. Watching. "Hey, did you see that?" I whispered to Jenna, my heart pounding now. She looked over at the mannequin, squinting. "See what?" "The mannequin, I paused. I didn't want to sound crazy, but I knew what I saw. Suddenly, the bathroom door squealed open, and Alex emerged, his face pale and drained of color. "Let's go," he said, his voice tight. He walked past us without another word, heading straight for the door. "What happened?" Jenna asked, but Alex didn't answer. He just kept walking, fast. His eyes flicked nervously to the mannequins lining the walls, and that's when I saw it again. This time, I was sure. The mannequins were facing us now, every single one of them. Their eyeless faces angled in our direction, their bodies subtly shifted, no longer frozen but somehow, alert. We rushed out of the store, following Alex. The door swung shut behind us with a heavy thud, and I swear I heard the faint rustle of movement inside. Back outside, the night air was thick, heavier than before. The car sat where we left it, but something was wrong. The headlights flickered, the engine stalled as Alex fumbled with the keys, trying to get it started. We all piled in, my hands shaking as I slammed the door behind me. They weren't just mannequins, Alex muttered under his breath, his voice barely a whisper as he twisted the key in the ignition. "What are you talking about?" I asked, glancing out the window. "They're watching us," he said it so matter-of-factly, and my stomach dropped. Then, through the rearview mirror, I saw something that made my blood run cold. The mannequins were no longer inside the rest stop. They were standing in the parking lot. "Drive!" Jenna screamed, her voice cracking with panic. Alex jammed the key into the ignition, twisting it desperately, but the car wouldn't start. The engine coughed and sputtered, refusing to turn over. Outside, the mannequins stood motionless, lined up like an army, their faceless heads all turned toward us. But what made my skin crawl was that they weren't in the same positions they had been before. They had moved closer. "What the hell is wrong with the car?" I shouted, my own voice shaking. Alex cursed under his breath, trying the key again. His knuckles were white, and sweat dripped down his face despite the cold desert air. "I don't know. It was fine earlier. Forget the car, let's run," Jenna said, already reaching for the door handle. I turned my head to look again, and my heart stuttered. The mannequins were no longer just standing, they were walking. Slow, deliberate movements, their stiff limbs creaking as they made their way toward us. It was unnatural, the way their bodies jerked with each step, but they were getting closer. "We need to get out of here, now," I yelled. "Wait." Alex's voice was frantic. "Just one more try." The mannequins were only feet away now. Their blank, faceless heads seemed to be locked on us, and I couldn't shake the feeling that they weren't just moving, they were hunting. Jenna grabbed my arm, her nails digging into my skin, pulling me toward the door. I didn't resist. We flung the doors open and bolted into the desert, leaving Alex behind, still struggling with the ignition. As soon as my feet hit the gravel, I heard the sound. A rhythmic clicking noise, like bones snapping into place. I looked over my shoulder and froze. The mannequins were running. Their once jerky movements had become fluid, too fast. Their arms swung unnaturally at their sides, legs bending at odd angles as they sprinted toward us. Jenna and I tore across the parking lot, the ground crunching beneath our shoes. The desert stretched out ahead of us, vast and empty, but there was nowhere to go. Nowhere to hide. Just miles of open land under the cold, moonlit sky. Alex had finally gotten the car started. I could hear the roar of the engine behind us, but I didn't dare turn back to see if he was making it out. My breath was ragged in my throat, my chest tight with fear as Jenna and I ran blindly into the desert. The wind howled, whipping dust into our faces, but it wasn't enough to drown out the sound of those clicking, snapping footsteps behind us. Suddenly, Jenna stumbled, her foot catching on a rock. She fell hard, hitting the ground with a gasp. I stopped, skidding to a halt beside her. "Come on." I grabbed her arm, trying to pull her up, but she was shaking, her ankle twisted painfully beneath her. "They're coming," she whimpered, her voice barely audible over the sound of our ragged breathing. I turned around and saw them. 3 of the mannequins were only a few yards away, their arms outstretched, fingers twitching as if they were preparing to grab us. I could see the way their limbs bent in impossible angles, their porcelain-like bodies gleaming in the moonlight. They moved faster than they should have been able to, their blank faces locked onto us with unsettling precision. With a surge of adrenaline, I pulled Jenna up and threw her arm over my shoulder, half dragging her as we staggered forward. We weren't going to make it. I knew it. They were too fast, too relentless. But then, the headlights of Alex's car sliced through the darkness. He swerved off the road, barreling toward us. The tires screeched as he slammed on the brakes right in front of us, the car door flying open. "Get in!" Alex yelled. We didn't hesitate. Jenna and I dove into the back seat, and Alex floored the gas. The car lurched forward, gravel spraying from the tires as we sped away from the rest stop. I twisted around in the seat, watching as the mannequins disappeared into the night. But just before they faded completely from view, I saw one last, chilling thing. The mannequins had stopped running. They were standing still again, perfectly frozen, their heads turned in unison to watch us leave. But this time, their hands were raised in an eerie wave, as if saying goodbye. And then, just as we thought we had escaped, the radio crackled to life. A voice, cold and emotionless, filled the car. "You can't leave. Not yet." The voice crackling over the radio made my blood run cold. It was distorted, mechanical, but unmistakable. "You can't leave. Not yet." Jenna gasped from the back seat, clutching her ankle, her eyes wide with terror. Alex glanced at me, his face pale as he gripped the steering wheel tightly, knuckles white against the cracked leather. He floored the gas pedal harder, the car jerking forward as the engine groaned. We sped down the dark highway, the rest stop fading into the distance behind us, but the voice followed, echoing through the speakers like it was coming from inside our heads. "You belong to us now." "No. No, no, no," I muttered, fiddling with the radio dials, trying to turn it off. But it didn't matter. The voice wasn't coming from the radio. It wasn't coming from anywhere. And yet, it was everywhere. Alex slammed his hand against the dashboard. "What the hell is happening? Why can't we get away from this place?" The highway stretched ahead, long and empty, but something was wrong. The air felt thick, suffocating, as if the night itself was closing in around us. The headlights barely cut through the darkness, and I couldn't shake the feeling that we were driving in circles, that no matter how far we went, we weren't really leaving. Jenna sat up, her face drenched in sweat. "Guys, do you see that?" I turned my head, following her gaze, and my heart sank. Off to the side of the road, barely visible in the dim light, was a sign. It was rusted, covered in dust, but I could still make out the faded words, "Next rest stop, 2 miles." I stared at it in disbelief. That can't be right. We just left the rest stop. Alex's eyes darted from the road to the sign, confusion and panic mixing on his face. "We've been driving for miles. How is it 2 miles ahead?" But there was no mistaking it. The next rest stop, the same rest stop, was only 2 miles away. Jenna let out a soft sob from the back seat. "We're trapped. We're not getting out of here." The car raced forward, the desert landscape on either side shifting in strange, unnatural ways. The cacti seemed to bend toward us, their spindly arms reaching out like they wanted to grab hold of the car and pull us off the road. The stars overhead flickered, dimming until the sky was almost pitch black. And still, that voice lingered, whispering over the radio, weaving in and out of our thoughts. "You can't leave." The headlights illuminated another sign. "Next rest stop, 1 mile." "No," Alex whispered, his voice cracking. "No, this isn't real. This can't be real." I didn't have the words to comfort him because I didn't believe it either. It felt like we were driving straight into some kind of nightmare, the road folding back on itself, pulling us closer to whatever waited for us at that cursed rest stop. Jenna gripped my arm from the back seat, her voice barely above a whisper. "We're not going to make it, are we?" I didn't answer. The lights of the rest stop appeared ahead, flickering in the distance like a mirage in the desert. But this time, something was different. The mannequins weren't just standing by the windows, they were lining the road, standing in neat, rigid rows on either side of the highway, their faceless heads turned toward us as we approached. Some of them held signs, the words scrawled in red, jagged letters, "Welcome back and you can't escape." As we drew closer, their heads turned in perfect unison to follow the car's movement. My skin prickled with dread. They weren't mannequins anymore, not the way we had thought. Something more alive was inside those bodies, something malevolent. Alex gritted his teeth, speeding up as if sheer velocity could outrun whatever force was pulling us back. "We can't stop here," he said, his voice trembling with fear. But the car started to sputter, the engine coughing like it was choking on something. Alex cursed under his breath, slamming his fist against the steering wheel. The lights of the rest stop were growing brighter, closer. And then, without warning, the car skidded to a stop. The engine died. Everything went silent. "No, no, please," Jenna whimpered from the back, clutching her ankle. I could hear her breath quickening, on the verge of hyperventilating. Alex tried the key again, but it was useless. The engine was dead. I looked out the window, and my stomach dropped. The mannequins had moved again. They were standing in the parking lot, motionless. Waiting. But they weren't just watching us this time. They were blocking the road. "We need to run," I whispered, my voice barely audible over the suffocating silence. Alex didn't argue. He threw the door open, and we all scrambled out of the car, sprinting into the desert. The wind howled around us, the sound of our feet crunching against the gravel drowned out by the growing presence of something behind us. I didn't dare look back, but I could feel it. I could feel them, those mannequins, following, closing in on us. We ran, lungs burning, hearts pounding, deeper into the darkness, knowing there was nowhere to hide. Nowhere to escape. But then, Jenna stumbled again, falling to the ground. I can't go any further," she gasped, her voice filled with panic and pain. I turned to help her up, but then I saw it, one of the mannequins, now towering over her. It stood perfectly still, but its head was moving, slowly tilting down toward her, as if studying her. Its arms began to raise. Jenna's scream pierced the air, and that's when I knew we weren't running anymore. We were being hunted. Jenna's scream echoed through the desert night, slicing through the thick, oppressive air like a knife. Time seemed to slow as I reached out for her, but before I could grab her hand, the mannequin loomed over her, its porcelain face bending, warping, into something grotesque. It twisted and stretched, its head splitting open in the middle, revealing nothing but blackness inside, as if the thing had no real form, just a void of darkness. "Help me." Jenna's voice was desperate, raw with terror. I lunged toward her, grabbing her arm, yanking with every ounce of strength I had left. For a split second, I thought I had her, thought we might escape. But the mannequin's hand shot out, its fingers long and jagged, digging into her skin. She was yanked back with unnatural force, her body lifted off the ground as if she weighed nothing. "No!" I screamed, pulling harder, but it was useless. The mannequin's grip tightened, pulling Jenna toward its gaping, faceless void. Her body jerked violently as she let out one final, blood-curdling scream before being swallowed whole by the darkness. I stumbled back, falling onto the dirt, my breath coming in short, panicked gasps. She was gone, vanished, as if she had never existed at all. The mannequin stood still once more, its face perfectly smooth and blank again, as if it hadn't just consumed my friend. Alex grabbed my arm, dragging me to my feet. "We have to keep moving." His voice was frantic, but I could barely hear him over the pounding of my heart. My vision blurred, the world spinning around me. "Jenna," I whispered, still in shock. "She's gone." Alex snapped, his voice cracking with fear. "We can't do anything for her now. We need to go." He was right. As much as I wanted to collapse, to scream, to fight back, there was no time. The mannequins were closing in. They weren't just standing in the parking lot anymore. They were everywhere now, surrounding us in the desert. Some of them moved jerkily, their stiff limbs bending and twisting in ways that no human could, while others stalked forward with an eerie, unnatural grace. We turned and ran, our legs burning as we sprinted deeper into the desert. There was no sense of direction anymore, just the overwhelming urge to put as much distance as possible between us and the mannequins. But no matter how fast we ran, the clicking of their footsteps grew louder behind us, their relentless pursuit never slowing. "Do you see anything?" Alex panted, glancing over his shoulder. I could hear the terror in his voice, the same terror that clawed at my chest. I shook my head. There was nothing but endless desert, stretching out in every direction. No landmarks, no lights, no hope. We were lost, running blind into the darkness. And then, up ahead, a faint glow. It was the rest stop. Again. "No, no, this isn't possible," I gasped, skidding to a halt. We had run for what felt like miles, yet somehow, we were right back where we had started. The neon sign flickered weakly, casting an eerie glow over the building, and I could see the mannequins waiting, standing perfectly still in the parking lot, just like before. "We're trapped," Alex said, his voice trembling. "We're going in circles." I glanced behind us. The mannequins were still following, their faceless heads tilted toward us, their movements methodical, patient. They didn't need to rush. They knew we had nowhere to go. I grabbed Alex's arm. "We have to keep moving. We can't stop." But before we could take another step, the ground beneath us began to tremble. A low rumbling sound echoed through the desert, growing louder by the second. I looked around in confusion, trying to make sense of what was happening, and that's when I saw it. The ground was splitting open. Cracks snaked across the desert floor, jagged and unnatural, as if the earth itself was tearing apart. And from those cracks, dark, shadowy figures began to rise, their forms twisting and shifting like smoke. They were like the mannequins, but different, more fluid, more alive. Their bodies pulsed with dark energy, and as they rose from the ground, they began to swarm toward us. "Run!" I shouted, but Alex was frozen, staring at the nightmare unfolding around us. The shadow creatures closed in, moving faster than the mannequins had. Their forms flickered in and out of existence, 1 second solid and the next, nothing but wisps of darkness. They circled us, surrounding us completely, cutting off any chance of escape. I backed up, my chest heaving with panic, until I felt something cold against my back. I turned, and my heart nearly stopped. One of the mannequins was right behind me, its hand already reaching out, its fingers inches from my face. "Alex!" I screamed, but it was too late. The mannequin grabbed me, its cold, hard grip closing around my arm, pulling me closer to its blank, featureless face. I struggled, kicking and thrashing, but its strength was overwhelming. My vision blurred, my body weakening as the mannequin's touch spread icy numbness through my veins. I could hear Alex shouting my name, but his voice was distant, muffled, like it was coming from the other side of a tunnel. And then, just as I felt myself slipping into the darkness, the mannequin leaned down, its smooth face inches from mine. "You never left," it whispered, the voice hollow and cold. "You've always been here." With that, everything went black. When I woke up, the desert was gone. The rest stop was gone. The mannequins were gone. I was standing in the parking lot, alone, under a pale, empty sky. The highway stretched out before me, endless and silent. And I knew, deep down in my bones, that I was never going to leave. Not really. I was part of the rest stop now. Just like Jenna. Just like all the others who had stopped here, thinking they could escape. But there was no escape. Not from this place.